You have been told a dangerous lie. You've been taught that a life without support is a life headed for failure. That to walk alone is a sign you are broken, unlovable, or lost. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the very moment the crowd disappears, the lights go out, and no one is left to hold you up, is the moment you finally meet the most powerful version of yourself? Carl Jung did not see the void of loneliness as a curse. He saw it as an initiation, a descent that must happen before any genuine ascent can begin. Today, we are not going to give you motivational comfort. We are going to walk into the architecture of a psyche, forced to build itself from the ground up. And by the end of this journey, you will never fear walking alone again. Imagine standing in a vast, silent hall. The echoes of the people who once guided you have completely faded. There is no applause, no direction, no map. For most of your life, your identity was a negotiation, shaped by the reactions of parents, partners, and society. But now, in the crushing stillness, that identity starts to dissolve. This is the psychological breaking point where most people panic. They reach for any external noise to fill the void. But from the perspective of depth psychology, you have just entered the only space where a true self can be born. The terror you feel is not a sign of sickness. It is the vertigo of absolute freedom. We are going to explore a ruthless yet transformative truth. The human psyche possesses a latent blueprint for success that only activates when external scaffolding is removed. Jung called this process individuation, and it is violent, lonely, and absolutely necessary. If you are ready to see the hidden pattern behind why isolation often precedes greatness, then stay with me. You are not just watching a video, you are stepping into the night sea journey. To understand the hidden pattern of the unsupported life, we must first shatter a societal illusion. We are conditioned to believe that emotional stability is a joint venture. You have a problem, you call a friend. You feel sad, you seek a group. This is a comforting design, but it creates a psychological monoculture. When the system collapses, when the divorce happens, when the career ends, when death visits, people do not just lose their footing, they lose their sense of self because their psyche was never forced to generate its own internal architecture. The hidden pattern is this: loneliness is not a failure of connection. It is a signal from the unconscious demanding depth over width. In Jungian terms, the libido, or psychic energy that you constantly pump into maintaining a social persona, the mask you wear to be liked, respected, or loved, suddenly has nowhere to go. That energy doesn't just vanish. It reverses its flow. It plunges downward into the depths of your own being, illuminating the machinery of your own mind. This is the moment you stop asking, "What do they want from me?" and start asking, "What is happening inside me?" We see this in the biographies of history's most influential figures. The inventor Nikola Tesla described his moments of stark isolation as the source of his most precise visions. The writer Fyodor Dostoevsky's genius was not forged in comfort, but in a Siberian prison camp, where every external layer of his identity was stripped away in the freezing cold. They were not supported. They were pressurized. And under that geological pressure, the carbon of a borrowed personality crystallized into a diamond of authentic selfhood. The danger of a supported life is that it allows you to avoid the interrogation of your own shadow. When you are alone, you initially feel something terrifying: the lack of a barrier. There is no buffer between you and the raw, uncensored content of your unconscious. You start to notice the envy you hide, the rage you swallow, the strange, dark fantasies that don't fit the good person image you sell to the world. Most people see this burst of darkness as a signal to go back to the crowd, to distract themselves. But here is the revelation. These shadows are not anomalies. They are fuel. Ambition is often a refined form of aggression. Creativity is often a transmutation of deep melancholy. When life strips you of support, it silences the shoulds of the tribe. You can no longer borrow goals from your father or values from your culture. You are forced to sit in the ashes of your broken persona, and in those ashes you begin to notice embers still glowing, desires that are intrinsically your own, not implanted by others. This is the difference between being isolated and being initiated. Isolation is the absence of others. Initiation is the presence of a deeper guide within yourself. When you are truly alone, you develop a skill that no supported person ever masters, the ability to distinguish between the voice of conditioning and the voice of the self. You stop performing a life and start living one. But as we stay in this silence, the mind reveals a darker layer. The wall between your ego and your unconscious thins. And this takes us to a point where many solitary travelers break. You are no longer just feeling loneliness. You are beginning to feel the presence of something inside you that you have spent a lifetime running from. We are about to enter the darkness of the soul. And I ask you now to stop fearing it. At this stage of the unsupported journey, a strange and disquieting shift occurs. The silence is no longer just empty. It becomes populated. You begin to sense the parts of yourself you locked in the basement of your psyche decades ago. Carl Jung made a distinction that saves lives: the difference between the persona and the shadow. The persona is the bright, polished lobby of your personality, the place where you show guests around. The shadow is the vast, chaotic boiler room below. When you lose external support, you no longer have the energy to maintain the lobby. The lights flicker. You are forced down the stairs into the boiler room. The hidden truth about human behavior is that your greatest potential isn't hiding in the light. It is chained in the dark. The sensitive boy who was told to man up doesn't disappear. His emotional depth festers and becomes depression or biting sarcasm. The assertive girl who was punished for being too much doesn't vanish. Her leadership potential turns into secretive manipulation. When you are alone, you meet them. You meet the creature you have been running from. Your first instinct is to kill it, to silence it with medication, entertainment, or shallow positivity. But that is precisely why so many fail here. They try to destroy a part of themselves that holds the key. As Jung profoundly noted, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Consider the story of a man I once studied. He was a calm, agreeable executive, the nice guy of the office. After a brutal corporate restructuring, he lost his team, his title, and his entire support system overnight. No one called. The phone went dead. Forced into the void, he expected sadness. What terrified him was the incandescent rage that surfaced. He had never been allowed to be angry. His persona was built on being the peacemaker. But alone in his living room, he felt a primal fury at being disrespected and discarded. At first he tried to suppress it, telling himself good people don't hate. But then, he did something remarkable. He dialogued with the rage. He asked it what it wanted. The answer wasn't violence. The rage wanted dignity. It wanted boundaries. He realized his kindness had never been virtue. It had been cowardice dressed in a smile. By integrating this ferocious shadow energy, he didn't become a brute. He became decisive. He started a new business not by begging for partnerships, but by commanding respect. His aggression, once a hidden beast eating him alive, became a centaur, a warrior serving his conscious will. This is the alchemical miracle of the dark night. When you stop fearing the broken, ugly, and castaway parts of your soul, you find the energy there. The energy that was used to keep the lid on the pressure cooker is suddenly released. You stop asking, "Why am I such a mess?" and start asking, "What medicine is this darkness offering me?" But awareness of the dark is only the first test. There is a test far more intimate and painfully difficult. It is something we usually expect from a mother, a lover, or a best friend. When you fall down and your knees are bleeding, spiritually speaking, who picks you up? If there is no one behind you, and you are on the ground, the journey ends unless you discover a hidden chamber of the psyche. We are moving into the art of self-comfort, a skill that marks the dividing line between permanent victimhood and silent victory. We reach now the most tender and most misunderstood threshold in the psychology of solitude, the ability to be your own mother, father, and healer. From our very first breath, we are wired for external co-regulation. An infant cannot soothe itself. It needs a heartbeat and a hand. But psychological adulthood requires an enucleation of that dependency. If external comfort is gone, and you turn inward only to find a harsh, critical tyrant waiting for you, you will crumble. This is why loneliness destroys some and tempers others. The ones who survive learn the dual role of the wounded child and the nurturing adult within the same mind. Most people, when they fail in solitude, do not comfort themselves. They lacerate themselves. "You idiot, you failed. You're a loser. No wonder you're alone." This is the internalized voice of a punishing parent, a society that values only utility, or a culture that equates vulnerability with weakness. Learning to comfort yourself is not about buying yourself a gift or taking a bubble bath. It is a radical psychological surgery where you sever the link between a mistake and your self-worth. Jung spoke extensively on the concept of acceptance, not passive resignation, but an active, conscious embrace of the fact that you are right now a limited, struggling, and sometimes pathetic human being, and that this is the raw material of transformation. When you lack support, emotions are not gentle. Grief hits like a physical blow. Shame burns like a fire. The unsupported brain quickly spirals into the freeze response if these emotions are judged. But if you can sit with yourself the way a wise elder sits with a hurt child, without judgment, without a desperate need to fix it in 5 minutes, the nervous system begins to shift. You literally rewire your brain from threat mode to safety mode. Safety and solitude. This is the epitome of inner strength. A woman I recall, an immigrant in a new country with no family, described her nights of paralyzing panic. She had no one to call. But she learned to place her hand on her own chest and speak aloud, "I know you're scared. It's okay. We are still breathing. We are still here." This sounds simple, but she was building a mother inside her psyche. She was reparenting the abandoned parts of herself. When you can hold your own shattered pieces without cutting yourself on the edges, you become untouchable by the world's approval. You no longer need the applause because you are no longer booing yourself from the sidelines. The inner war stops. You transition from being a problem to be solved into a person to be nurtured. But what happens when the comforting takes effect and the panic subsides? You look at the scars and the history. You see the pain that was inflicted upon you not just by your own mind, but by life itself. There is a danger here of becoming a passive museum of wounds. But the psychological mind knows a deeper secret. Pain isn't just a scar. Pain is a sealed forge. And the heat inside that forge, if you can reach into it, can power the rest of your life. We are about to turn your deepest betrayals into your greatest momentum. Pain in the victim mind is a dead end. Pain in the seeker's mind is a compass. Carl Jung once remarked that the unconscious reveals itself through disturbances. When something hurts, it isn't just a random spike of misery. It is an indicator that a complex has been touched. A wound is a pocket of high-intensity energy. Most people are afraid of the wound, so they build their entire personalities as a fortress around it to avoid disturbing it. But the fortress is also a prison. When you are walking without support, you don't have the manpower to maintain the fortress walls anymore. The invaders get in. The pain breaks out. And this breakdown is in reality a forced breakthrough. The process of turning pain into momentum begins when you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What did this break open for me?" Pain shatters the superficial ego. It is a demolition crew that clears the land. The betrayal you experienced may have shattered your naivety. The failure may have dismantled your pride. The loss may have vaporized your shallow attachments. In the rubble, you feel empty. But emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is space, and for the first time in your life, you have the space to build a structure that is architecturally sound, aligned with the contours of your actual soul, not the prefabricated box society handed you. Consider the archetype of the phoenix. It doesn't casually molt feathers. It burns. It catches fire, and its old body is reduced to embers. The flames you go through when you are unsupported, the burning shame of a public failure, the funeral pyre of a marriage, the cremation of a dream. These fires are not punishments. They are energetic excisions of dead tissue. Jung described the transcendent function, a psychological process where the tension between who you are and who you need to become generates a third, higher state. Pain is that tension. When you can endure the burning, not freezing, not running, but burning consciously, the pain metabolizes into a quiet fuel. You see this in those who have lost everything. They develop a sharpness, a clarity, and a deep authority that life coaches can't teach. They stop negotiating with life. A friend who survived a near-fatal car crash told me he lives differently now. He said, "I don't worry about petty insults anymore. I already saw my body wrapped in metal. This is extra time." His pain gave him the ultimate ontological selection, what actually matters. When you take a wound and use it as a lens to filter out the trivial, you have turned the poison into medicine. The abuse survivor becomes the vigilant protector. The bankrupt entrepreneur becomes the wise mentor who teaches risk, not just profit. The grief-stricken lover becomes the poet who teaches depth. Your wound is not just a thing to heal. It is a vocation calling to you. To walk alone is to finally hear that call, without the static of the crowd's distraction. But even with a reason to move, even with fuel in the tank, there is a persistent, seductive saboteur lurking in the corridors of the mind. It is the most primitive and powerful decider of fate. It is the tyranny of emotion. We have built the structure. Now we must steer the ship. And we cannot let a violent storm of momentary feeling crash us into the rocks. This is the discipline of will, not as a harsh taskmaster, but as a loyal compass. We now approach the final, defining lesson of the solitary path. You have faced the darkness. You have healed your wounds. You have found your fuel. But one critical question remains. Who is driving the machine? The person who crumbles without support is the person who allows their transient emotional states to dictate their permanent commitments. Feelings are visitors. They are biological and psychological signals, not commands. Fear says retreat. Doubt says stop. Exhaustion says quit. If you are alone, there is no one there to counter those voices with a pep talk. There is only you, facing the tidal wave of a mood that tells you to stay in bed. Emotion-led lives are chaotic, fragmented spirals. They are lives where discipline is constantly overridden by the impulse for relief. From a Jungian perspective, emotions are the voice of the complexes, the energy-filled clusters of the unconscious. If you let those complexes drive, you are not living. You are being lived. Will, in the deep Jungian sense, is not the masculine push of force. It is the ability to hold the tension between opposite impulses and still choose the direction that aligns with your totality, yourself, not just your momentary comfort. Imagine you are sailing across a vast, dark ocean. You are alone on the boat. A storm hits. The waves of panic crash over the deck. If you become the storm, if you let the panic take the wheel, the boat capsizes. The will is the quiet part of you that sits at the helm, soaked to the bone, terrified, acknowledging the storm, but holding the wheel steady. You feel the urge to let go, but your hand stays. That is the secret of those who succeed without support. They do not lack fear or sadness. They lack submission to it. They have built what Jung might call a superior function of stillness. They can feel a depressive episode descend like a black fog, and instead of screaming, "I can't work, I'm too sad," they whisper, "I am sad right now, and I will sharpen this pencil." Action precedes clarity. Clarity rarely precedes action. The unsupported victor knows that the emotion of readiness is a luxury they cannot afford. They act, and the emotion eventually catches up, like a dog running after its master. This is not repression. Repression is pretending the storm isn't there. This is directed behavior despite the storm. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. You are saying to your unruly inner child, "I see you are upset, but we are moving forward now." When you can witness your rage, your lust, your sloth, and your fear without becoming them, you have achieved the state of the observer. And nothing outside can touch that. We have reached the final evolution. You have tamed the animal within. But we must now ask a deeper question. Where does the energy to continue for years, silently, unseen, come from? If you don't find this source, you will eventually run out of steam. This is the final treasure of the solitary path, the hidden wellspring of intrinsic motivation. We are about to tap into a source that never runs dry. The greatest danger for the unsupported path isn't immediate failure, it is entropy, the slow dying of momentum, because there is no one there to ignite your engine every morning. We have all seen the motivational speaker who needs a stadium full of people to feel alive. He is weak. True power, as we are exploring, is entirely subterranean. Jung made a specific distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is small, hungry, and needs constant feeding. Its motivation is like a gas tank with a leak. It must be constantly refilled with money, likes, status, and comparison. This is why external motivation is a trap. It is a chain, not a fuel line. But the self, the totality of the psyche, the blueprint of who you are meant to be in the universe. That is a nuclear reactor. When you tap the self as your source of motivation, you stop needing daily refills of recognition. You are driven by a sense of fidelity to your own destiny, not the pursuit of happiness. How do you build this? You build it by falling in love with the texture of your own mystery. When you are alone, you begin to notice the tiny, curious impulses that have nothing to do with the market or society. You might have a sudden urge to paint a black canvas. You might want to write a letter to a dead philosopher. You might want to build a table. Most people ignore these impulses because they don't lead to a paycheck or a pat on the back. But these impulses are the language of the self. When you honor them, when you take action on a curiosity without an expectation of outcome, you are literally feeding the core of your psyche. Motivation stops being a spasm of excitement and becomes a quiet, persistent river. You work because you are drawn by an inner gravity, not pushed by a cattle prod. A painter I once met lived in abject poverty, completely ignored by the art world. Yet he painted every morning. He had no gallery, no patrons. He wasn't bitter. He was serene. He told me, "I don't paint for them. I paint because the image needs to exist, and I am the only one who can bring it. My hand is the bridge." His motivation was cosmological, not social. This is the deep psychology of vocation or calling. When you know you are an instrument of a specific, unique, and mysterious aspect of reality, you don't need a crowd to cheer you on. The work itself whispers to you, "Keep going." This matters in the structure of the whole. You replace the fragile ego with the indestructible self. And once you have done that, you are not just unsupported. You have become a support for others without losing yourself. You have become the silent, steady axis around which the chaos of the world can spin without breaking you. Perhaps now you realize the truth was always inverted. The silence was never empty. The darkness was never meant to destroy you. The lack of a hand to hold was never a punishment, but a rigorous, severe mercy from the depths of your own psyche, forcing you to find your feet. From the perspective of Carl Jung, the person you were before you watched this, the person desperate for a mentor, a savior, an outer structure, has already begun to dissolve. You are stepping into the life where you are the author. You no longer move forward because someone is pushing you, but because the destiny implanted in your very DNA is pulling you forward like a magnet toward true north. Victory without support is not a loud war cry over defeated enemies. It is the quiet, indestructible solidity of knowing that you can sit in the pitch-black room of the soul, alone, and feel the warmth of your own presence. It is knowing that even if everything external is stripped away, the titles, the money, the lovers, what remains is still whole, still sacred, and still moving. You have learned to comfort your wounds. You have learned to harness your shadow as fuel. You have shifted the seed of your motivation from the noisy, volatile world outside to the eternal, steady self within. You are no longer a child lost in the forest. You have become the forest. And inside that forest, a light burns that no wind can extinguish. Carry that forward. This is not just a psychological theory. It is a new anatomy of the soul.